thank you for joining me today on Ending the Odyssey. I'm very excited to hear your story. I feel like I've been a small part of your journey just because we've known each other for so long. If I remember right, we met at a Texas parent-to-parent conference where we just kept sitting next to each other all day, couldn't stop talking. And then a week later, we wound up in the same therapy office with our kids. And then that was that. What year was that? Like 2013?
Oh, I yeah, I think that
Yeah.
was maybe it. I think it might have been
Okay.
2014.
So we're almost on our 10-year anniversary.
Yay!
Yay! And so, yeah, I'm just very excited for you to share your story of having Cole diagnosed and all the amazing things you've been able to do since you had a proper diagnosis. Do you want to tell me a bit about Cole's disorder?
Yeah, so I'm honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So my son Cole, he is now almost 13. He was diagnosed with SETBP1 haploinsufficiency disorder. Um, it's a genetic disorder, and so it basically impacts how his brain works. So I may be jumping ahead, but
Okay.
it has symptoms for kids that have this disorder where they have varying degrees of intellectual disability, autistic traits or autism, speech and language delays are pretty much across the board, ADHD and behavior issues. And then we also have like some gastro, some sleep, some vision issues. And then another common symptom is hypotonia.
So that's a lot of symptoms. That's a lot to take care of. How does it vary from patient to patient? Are some more profound, some mildly affected?
Yeah. So we are finding that one, not all kids or young adults or adults, because we've as the genetic testing has progressed, then we've had adults that have been identified with this disorder. And so some kids or young adults may have just a few of the symptoms, and then they range in severity. So we have kids with severe ID to borderline ID. We've even
Mhm.
had a few individuals who have normal intellectual functioning, but maybe they're on the autism spectrum
Okay.
and we're diagnosed from that way. So yeah, it's varying, and it's definitely most kids I would say don't have the whole list of things.
Yeah. So you said it was a genetic disorder. How is it inherited?
So it's typically de novo, which means that neither my husband or I have the disorder,
Mhm.
but that um, basically when the embryo is forming, a change is made. And so then the child has this genetic difference in one of their many, many genes. And, you know, as I'm sure a lot of y'all know, we have all these different genes in our body, and everybody has all these different genetic changes that are totally normal. And however, there are some that are pathogenic or disease causing, and it can just be one gene that can make this difference. And so for my kid and others with this disorder, in the SETBP1 gene, most of them have just one tiny change. And so this one tiny change that my son has changes how he functions. And so for him, if he were to have a kid in the future, then he does have a 50% chance of passing it on. However, for my husband and I, we're not, it's not
Carrier.
likely that our other kids would have this disorder.
Yeah.
Like basically equivalent um,
It was a random
statistics is not,
happening. Yeah.
pardon?
It was a random happening.
It was a random happening, exactly.
How old was Cole when he was diagnosed?
So he was just a few days from turning 5.
Uh-huh.
But we had started the genetic diagnostic journey when he was 2.5.
Is
So it's
that when
like
you first noticed symptoms in him?
symptoms started sooner. I would say for him, his first symptoms were that he had low tone or
Mhm.
hypotonia. So he was more like a floppy baby. And what that means is that when we would hold him, he doesn't really hold on to you. You have to
Yeah.
really hold on to him, or he feels like he's gonna just like slip out of your hands.
Yeah.
So that was probably the first symptom we noticed. And then he didn't babble much as a
Hmm.
baby. So he was a late talker, and he also was developing his motor milestones, his gross motor
Uh-huh.
milestones at a later, like the end of normal to just past that.
Yeah.
Um, and so we started to see signs in his first year.
Okay. So from the time you saw signs to the time he was diagnosed was a little over 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you told when he was diagnosed? What did the physician tell you about the disorder?
Yeah. So it was a pediatric geneticist that gave us the diagnosis. And truthfully, she was really surprised that they found anything. So that was part of the diagnostic journey, was we had to do several rounds of testing.
Hmm.
And um, so she had made the comment, she says, for kids like Cole, a lot of times we don't find the reason.
Yeah.
And she had actually told us not to pursue the next type of testing. And that's the geneticist, which,
Yeah.
um, and so it actually we did go back to our physician, and his pediatrician, and she did agree with us that we should move forward.
Hmm.
Um, but with the geneticist telling us we shouldn't, we were
Yeah.
torn. And so basically we had to come up with justification for getting whole exome sequencing,
Yeah.
which is what identified the disorder. And so when the geneticist found out this is what he has, she basically went on the internet and found what all she could find and presented it to us. So she had no knowledge of the disorder. Um, there are, there's a, at the time, there were two disorders associated with the SETBP1 gene.
Uh-huh.
And so it was like, we think that he has a loss of this SETBP1 related disorders, is what it was listed at the time.
Yeah.
Um, but here's all the information about Shinzo-Gideon syndrome, which is also affiliated with SETBP1. And it is neurodegenerative and often fatal in the first couple of years of child's birth. So we were given information about that. And then there was a publication with 13 individuals buried in a publication of multiple disorders,
Yeah.
and that she shared with us. And I think one other paper with, a few things identified. But it was like, we really don't have much to share. We found something, we can tell you it's de novo.
Hmm.
Um, but there really wasn't much she could share. We were referred to a couple of organizations that basically help anyone with any rare disorder,
Yeah.
but we weren't connected with any other families. There were no medical specialists who knew,
Mhm.
who knew anything about it. It was kind of like, here's your diagnosis, here's a couple papers, and
Best of luck.
go home.
I did not know that. I didn't know that the geneticist told you, you're probably not going to find anything. Don't take it forward. That was really
Yeah,
brave of y'all to like go ahead and be like, no, I'm not going to listen. I'm going to like go ahead because I know. And so, yeah.
it just, I think, speaks to sometimes how hard it can be to find what is actually happening with your child.
Yeah. Even when the experts are telling you, it's probably not going to find anything. It's probably not going to help, go home. So,
Right.
yeah.
And that's what she told us. And so that's what we did. And, um, and then, yeah, if a specialist is telling you,
Hmm.
no, you don't need to move forward, that's the most information you have. And it
Yeah.
actually, the most influential for us is we attended a childhood apraxia of speech conference,
Hmm.
because he ended up being diagnosed with childhood apraxia of speech, and speech delays were very apparent.
Yeah.
And we talked with other parents at the conference, and they are the ones that shared that there were a couple of genes associated with speech and language.
Yeah.
And they basically shared some personal journeys that helped feel like we were then equipped to go back to the geneticist and say, here's some potential genes to look at.
Yeah.
Here's some, some other evidence that maybe he has this, one of these disorders, which weren't any of the things that he actually had.
Yeah. But
But it's a unique position, like
yeah.
that's the position we found ourselves in.
Yeah. Do you have any regrets or do you see any negative sides to having Cole properly diagnosed?
No, no, definitely no regrets.
Yeah.
I I do think getting a diagnosis is hard. So I
Mhm.
don't want to um I mean, honestly, I think the hardest time with Cole's journey was that first year after he was diagnosed.
Yeah.
And that has more to do with its being diagnosed with such a rare disorder. And it was 13 months before we were connected with our first family who lives in the United States, and that was via email because we
Uh-huh.
participated in some project that was states away, and that's how we even got connected to that family. Um, however, um, with that being said, because of the diagnosis, we now have a community. So
Hmm.
the reason we sought genetic testing is we would meet up, a lot of us are trying to find, okay, we identify that our child is different. Why are they different? So I would join different support groups,
Uh-huh.
and maybe children on the spectrum, children with sensory needs, children with motor coordination needs. Um, and I would find that I'd be sharing stories and nobody was like Cole. I mean, there would be overlaps for sure.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I met other SETBP1 families and we
Hmm.
started sharing stories, and our kids have similar traits, like you see how they engage and how they interact, and
Yeah.
there's some very similar characteristics, and um and you're just like, they get it.
Yeah.
They were like, I have stories where they were the only ones I ever had that were like, yeah, my child
Yeah.
does that. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's so affirming. Like, I mean, all
Yeah.
kids are unique, but
Yeah.
the
It takes away the
label,
loneliness of it all too.
it
Like,
is it is lonely. So
yeah.
to your point, so when Cole was diagnosed, then what you now know that all the effort you put in into helping
Hmm.
the child speak, walk, um, learn to write, because Cole's been in speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, horse therapy, swimming, and then all kinds of special needs,
Hmm.
physical activities. And you know that it is all worthwhile because you learn that this is something they're not going to grow out of.
Hmm.
Um, and then you also now know why there's a change, because
Yeah.
all these unique things are part of SETBP1 haploinsufficiency disorder. Like, it explains it. And
Yeah.
um,
It's
it
hugely validating.
it is very validating.
Yeah. And then I think I already know the answer to this question. I think you've already answered it, but I still often hear there's no point in a diagnosis if there's not a treatment available. And so I think you've already summarized all of the reasons why a diagnosis is important, even if there's not a treatment available.
No, it's hugely important for the parents. So um we haven't talked about it yet, but I
Mhm.
have, formed a nonprofit related to this.
Yeah.
And a huge reason for forming the nonprofit is that year of it being so hard and feeling alone and
Yeah.
not having a community, not having people like studying the disorder,
Yeah.
not it didn't have the name, it didn't have its name then. And so it took a long time to get connected. And now what feels so good, are families are getting diagnosed now, and day one, like, they're getting sent to our Facebook group, to our
Yeah.
website, and immediately they're connected. And we hear so often, like, we're not alone. We're so
Hmm.
glad we have this community.
Yeah.
And there's no, um, that is such a comfort. And it doesn't matter if there's not a treatment.
Yeah.
This feeling of feeling a part of another group and you're not handling this on your own, and you can put questions out there. We meet up.
Hmm.
Um, it's extremely valuable.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take this part and put it back before. So the video will get cut and move back. So I'm going to ask a question from before that I should have asked.
No worries.
So for SETBP1, are there any therapies or treatments available?
So we do not have any SETBP1 specific therapies or treatments, not at this time. We do have researchers working to understand
Hmm.
why having this disorder causes this array of symptoms.
Yeah.
And, we're trying to find out if any certain medications help our kids more than others, but we do not have any specific therapies or treatments at this point.
Yeah. So since Cole's been diagnosed, you've been able to do some really amazing things, and I am extremely proud of you. You formed the SETBP1 Society. Can you talk about forming that and then some of the major accomplishments that you've had?
Yeah. So, um, yeah. So SETBP1 Society was formed in order to kind of to bring hope and community um, for the SETBP1 community. So basically, after Cole's diagnosis, and I would, I had two kids and, and a spouse and a home. And so we'd during the day take care of all the daily things we need to do. And then after getting the kids to bed, then I would be on the computer researching all
Mhm.
hours of the night and most every night. Who understands differences in SETBP1? Are there any researchers? I'd find anything related to SETBP1 research and start sending emails and trying to find researchers, medical specialists, um, anyone that knew anything about it. And I couldn't find, and there were no organizations that were dedicated to SETBP1 differences. Yeah, no Facebook groups that
Mhm.
had. I will say, after my son's diagnosis, we did find a group that said in French it was a SETBP1 support group,
Uh-huh.
but it was a family of one. And
Yeah.
so then we became a family,
Then you joined together. It
then we
became a
joined
family of
together.
two.
Um, and so that was within a few months after the diagnosis. And so we had one family that
Mhm.
lived abroad that we connected to online. But there were no resources. And
Yeah.
so after a year of really looking into this and finding nothing,
Yeah.
then I was, going, what can I do? What can I do to change this? What can I do to change the landscape? And it took friends like
Mhm.
you and and a couple of other, like the study that we participated in Washington,
Mhm.
the research lead there kind of telling us, okay, other people in your shoes.
Is that Dr. Chung?
This was, that's a good guess. She has been super helpful throughout this whole journey. This was a researcher at the University of Washington in
Oh,
Washington
okay.
State.
Yeah.
And she had said, one option is to form a nonprofit. And honestly, that felt very daunting.
Mhm.
My background is in tech and I have a math degree. And,
Mhm.
starting a nonprofit was not, on my radar at
Nope.
all. And so supportive friends and family were like, okay, you can do this.
Mhm.
And it was like, well, it doesn't exist. And I don't want other people to have the feelings that I had.
Yeah.
And so we're in Texas, and it's truthfully not hard to form a nonprofit in Texas logistically.
Mhm.
Um, so a year after Cole was diagnosed, then we formed SETBP1 Society. And the main mission is to educate and support families,
Mhm.
to support, promote, and fund research,
Yeah.
and then to connect researchers, connect families, connect
Uh-huh.
medical professionals.
Yeah. So with the society, you started a natural history study for the disorder?
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
you
tell me
asked
about all
about
the great things you've been able to
our
do since Cole
accomplishment.
has had a proper diagnosis. I want to hear
Okay,
about the
so
mice. I want to hear about natural history study. I want to hear about the researchers, the labs, all of it.
okay, so a big focus on this of our organization has also been research. So we
Mm-hmm.
started um, funding research, opened up the grant process, I think within the first year of us starting.
Uh-huh.
And so we now have mice models, we have iPSC lines, and those are basically human cell lines. They're lines that are generated from um, skin,
Mm-hmm.
blood, or urine of individuals that have the disorder.
Yeah.
And they basically can take these lines and they can study them, like they talk about, like studying humans in a dish. Since
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to test humans, then you can evaluate it in a dish. So we have iPSC lines that are being studied. We have zebrafish,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I know may sound a little bit weird. Why are you going to have zebrafish?
No, that's excellent.
It's so far off from a
Mm.
human, but there are things that they're more cost effective to look at, and then they also have the nicety of you can test lots of drugs on them at a much cheaper rate.
Yeah.
So if you can find some meaningful differences, then they're a great model to also look at.
Yeah.
We have researchers all around the world. So we have researchers in Australia and Canada and all over Europe, obviously here in the United States, and a lot of them work together. So we bring our researchers together quarterly for our SETBP1 Alliance collaboration call.
Uh-huh.
And the researchers share their latest research and what's going on. And that's a great way for the researchers to collaborate, get to know who's in the field, and learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
We have a registry/natural history study with Simon Searchlight.
Okay.
They are part of the Simons Foundation,
Yeah.
and they also run the Safari Project, which if any that which is great if you have a kid who you suspect has autism. Um, they have a free program to be able to send samples and they'll test to see if your kid has autism for free. But the Simon Searchlight arm is the one we work with.
Uh-huh.
We also have a speech and language natural history study out of the Murdoch Children's Research Institute in Australia.
Okay.
And that and then we have a lot of other studies going on, but those are some of our natural history studies.
Yeah.
um, we've had our first in-person conference, and we're just signed today for the hotel for our 2024
Oh,
uh,
nice. Where is it going to
in-person
be?
conference here in Austin.
Oh, nice.
So super excited.
Yeah.
So a lot of these families, until they come to the conference, have never met another person with their child's disorder.
Nope.
We have less than 250 who've been diagnosed worldwide.
Uh-huh.
So again, like when we're speaking rare, we're speaking
Yeah.
rare.
Yeah.
But this is an opportunity that they get to come together, meet families, see other SETBP1 kids, which is like I love getting to see the other kids with SETBP1 and
Uh-huh.
how they interact. Some of my son's best friends are other SETBP1 kiddos,
Uh-huh.
because they just get each other. Like
Yeah.
it is so unique how they connect on a way that it like, I
Yeah.
don't know, you're almost like you're my sibling. I just
Yeah.
automatically get you.
Yeah.
And then they get to meet researchers get to meet the families.
That's huge for the researchers to actually meet the families and the patients, and it really inspires them.
It
Like
is,
team
and they're no
thinking.
longer just
Yeah.
doing this
In a dish.
this in a dish, right? I'm
Yeah.
I'm studying this line in a dish. It doesn't really have a connection to real world other
Yeah.
than does what pathway is being changed by this dish, and then you're like
Hmm.
seeing the little kids playing and interacting, and
Yeah.
oh, and this is why I'm doing this. This is the relevance of my work. Even it's relevant, but
Yeah.
this is the connection and the personal connection. And some of the researchers will have pictures of the kids,
Hmm.
in their booths to just help remind them,
Yeah.
and motivate them through their work too.
Yeah. You said you had about 200 patients diagnosed in the world. Do you know the prevalence of the disorder? How many patients there should be?
So we don't. I'd say there was one estimate put out there, but and it was like, and it was kind of buried in a paper, but it was like 1 in 100 or 1 in 200,000.
Uh-huh.
But the other part of that is it only was considering a subset. So it was a
Oh.
subset of ours. So
Hmm.
over time, so SETBP1 Society helps families who have kids affected by SETBP1 haploinsufficiency disorder, which we
Uh-huh.
abbreviate to SETBP1 HD,
Yeah.
and SETBP1 related disorders. Um, so we've now kind of identified 3 buckets
Yeah.
of for individuals who have a SETBP1 difference. And over time, I mentioned earlier, there's Shinzo-Gideon syndrome, and they now have a foundation, and
Oh,
I
okay.
work closely with them
Uh-huh.
too. And so we have basically, if you have a SETBP1 difference, no matter what it is, there's a foundation and a community
For you.
for you.
Yeah. And then how are you able to raise the funds to pay for all of this research and conferences and all the work that you do?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so for us, because we are so small, and I should,
Mhm.
we're a volunteer-based nonprofit, so nobody earns an income
Get paid.
for our nonprofit. And the thing that's been the most important for us is our
Uh-huh.
partnerships.
Okay.
So a lot of times we are partnering with someone in order to raise the funds. And so we've been very fortunate along the way in several numerous ways. Because if we were to only, it would just be us doing everything. I mean, we're such a tiny community.
Hmm.
So at different points along the way, we partner. So one of our partners is the University of Pennsylvania Orphan Disease Center,
Okay.
and they host a $1 million bike ride every year. And in that, it's 30 plus groups who
Mhm.
sponsor or support one specific genetic disorder, and they form a team.
Yeah.
And they bike in Philly, and all the funds that they raise um, are matched up to $30,000,
Oh, okay.
dollar for dollar. So when we raise 30,000, then that's actually a $60,000 grant.
Yeah.
And then if we raise above that, then that, all goes, and all of the funds go towards that disorder's research. So
Mhm.
we've been participating with them since 2019
Yeah.
and have issued quite a few grants through that program. We, I mentioned earlier, we work closely with Simon Searchlight.
Uh-huh.
They actually um, hosted our conference with 3 other rare disorder groups last year. So
Okay.
that partnership has been so instrumental. In
Yeah.
addition to the partnerships, we do things like for Giving Tuesday, we do Facebook fundraisers. So
Hmm.
we and this is one more that is more of our families. Our families
Yeah.
set up Facebook fundraisers, and so for us, these kind of either the partnerships have been the most instrumental, and
Mm.
then we also leverage small little fundraising things here and there.
Yeah. So going back to your diagnostic odyssey with Cole, um, so we have newborn screening in the US, and they can detect a lot of disorders at birth. And now we have whole genome sequencing that can be done off a dry blood spot. Um, would you have liked to have Cole diagnosed earlier?
Yeah, I know. I would. I think the earlier you get the diagnosis,
Hmm.
then the less wandering on certain things you will have. So for example, our kids, all of our SETBP1 kids have speech delays. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's super common. So knowing you're going to need good quality speech therapy is very important.
Yeah.
And so understanding that you can go ahead and start therapies like that. And then our kids also have OT and PT.
Hmm.
And so then you would know, okay, if my son or my daughter are, they're not like Cole had to have PT to help him learn to walk.
Yeah.
And so you can start the therapies earlier.
Yeah.
So that's one reason. And then you also, you have a community, you know what to understand. There's families who for some reason will get diagnosed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe they're diagnosed in their first year. Those kids a lot of times are doing better
Mm-hmm.
because they know that my kid now needs to go and
Yeah.
get these therapies. I know I need to look out for attention issues early.
Yeah. Early childhood intervention has proved over and over again to be effective.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the ways that you can just, you kind of push that process up, and you're giving your child the best chance they can have for
Mhm.
leading the best quality of life. You're getting them all the advantages as early as you can.
Yeah. So with Cole having a proper diagnosis, one thing that we hardly ever touch on is the school system and how much services are provided through the school system through the Individuals with Disability Education Act. Since Cole is properly diagnosed, have you found accessing services within the school is easier? For example, you can go to them and say, kids with SETBP1 have this speech disorder, we know he needs speech services, he can't be punished for acting out because we know children with this disorder have ADHD, those type things.
I do think it helps. So Cole didn't start he did start public preschool for children with disabilities before
Mhm.
the diagnosis, but he
Okay.
didn't start kindergarten until after.
Okay.
And it has helped for us to be able to go to them and say, we tell them, and it's helped from both ways. One, we go and present the information, but we've also had where on their own, we've told them what his disorder is. We've had evaluators come and speak to at our IEP what our website says, and
Oh, you're like,
presented
yeah, I
that.
wrote that last week. Thank you.
It's been great because I was like, oh, they don't know I'm the president. I'm going to leave it that way. Because it's been really helpful. Them coming back
Yeah.
and telling me, oh, kids a lot of times have autism and have this.
You're
And you're
like,
like, great.
okay.
That's good to know. So no, it's
Yeah.
definitely helped.
Yeah.
And I think it has been a big part of why we've been fortunate in that
Uh-huh.
he's gotten a lot of services over the years and continues to. He's now in 6th grade.
Uh-huh.
And having the diagnosis also empowers me
Yeah.
because I know, like, one, where these challenges are coming from, and they're
Mhm.
going to continue unless we provide the right supports. It's not me
Yeah.
guessing. We have a lot more kids that are out there. There's still so much to learn, but
Yeah.
it's not going to go away. And I've learned about his learning style. And so we can always come back and go, okay, this is the reason he has it. But I also think he now has an autism label.
Mhm.
And I think it helps even get that
Yeah.
because our kids are almost all, not all, but a lot of kids with SETBP1 HD are very social. So they're going to go up to strangers like
Yeah.
they're friends, right? You can go grab someone's hand you don't know. And they've always, like Cole, for example's always been this way. Never met a stranger, super social. However, as he's gotten older, understanding the complexities of social
Oh, yeah.
engagement, um, and being able to not take things literally.
Mhm.
We've just seen a lot more, things arise.
Yeah.
And when he got his diagnosis, they did it like it's like syndromic autism is
Yeah.
what they gave him. But it's been helpful to get even more support for
Yeah.
Cole.
Yeah. So out of your 200 patients, how old is the oldest patient with SETBP1?
Well, the oldest one we saw, not I haven't met their family personally, and it was in a publication, and they were 73.
73. Okay.
So
So at least that gives you guidance on what to plan for in life. a big part of newborn screening is benefit. The major benefit has to be towards the child. And so I think we've already talked about all the benefits of getting diagnosed early, to start your therapies, to, plan with the school district what your child needs. But there's also long-term planning that you have to do for these people, because they have developmental disabilities. And so some might be able to function on their own with some supports, and some may need heavy support as they move into adulthood. Have you found it helpful to know families with older children with the disorder?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So the first family we got connected with in the US, like via email, like I say, it was via email.
Uh-huh.
Their child was, so Cole at that point was 6, and I think their child was like 14, so like
Yeah.
8 years older. And whether or not they wanted the role, I mean, it
Yeah.
basically, like, he was doing great. He doesn't live independently,
Uh-huh.
but he like, hearing how he was living gave us lots of hope, because we didn't know, like, all we knew of otherwise were in a publication, this like flat age,
Yeah.
sex, symptom, maybe a photo, but you don't know any details about their lives. And so having this connection, they were the first family that we kind of were like, okay, like, maybe Cole's future, it may or may not be like this, but it honestly gave us something to aim for,
Uh-huh.
because I felt the publications gave a more dismal picture,
Yeah.
and it was like, well, it doesn't seem like, I mean, like where my son is. it and
Hmm.
it, and so, and then over time we obviously have connected with more families, and it's really, really encouraging to hear these, like, the kids don't have to be living independent lives in order to be kind of role models for the kids, or
Yeah.
um, images of what you'd like your kid to be.
Uh-huh.
They A lot of these kids are happy. Some
Yeah.
of them have part-time jobs, supported part-time jobs.
Yeah.
Um, and it just helps you to, and then different living arrangements. So it helps you to see, okay, helps you envision different potential lives for your child, and to not, like, it's
Yeah.
really important to remember your child is your child, and
Yeah.
nobody can say what their future will hold.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so not trying to limit your child, or
Uh-huh.
let school tell you otherwise, or anyone else. You're just like, your child's on
Yeah.
their own path, and you're going to help them to lead their best life.
Yeah.
But it it's not necessarily defined, but you can see from other kids
Yeah.
what their life is like.
Yeah. I think about that a lot, how badly we want a therapy for our children, but whether or not they have a therapy doesn't take away from their value. And so they're still incredibly valuable and meaningful people, even if you can't provide the therapy for them. We want the therapy because we want life extension, we want healthiness, we want them to be free and independent. But even without that, they're still incredibly valuable people. So,
Yeah, and some of this, too, the ideas that therapy is helping to reduce frustration for them,
mhm.
because they're not learning at the same rate. So you want to give them the
Yeah.
tools to help, communicate and provide let you know what they're needing. But I can say for Cole, for example, and every SETBP1 kid, and every kid with, every kid has their gifts.
Yeah.
Cole is so creative, and it, I definitely believe it's because he has SETBP1 HD. Like,
Mhm.
so this even gives him, I feel like his unique perspective on the world, these ideas that he shares, aren't at all like how I or my husband or my younger child thinks. It is so
Yeah.
unique and so different. And I'm like, in the future, I was like, he would be great for company, for ideas, for
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
He just comes up out of nowhere. Like, how did you even come up with this idea?
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I think that P1 HD contributes to that. And I feel like he's the most empathetic
Hmm.
of our family. And, he expresses joy for things that people think are the most mundane
Yeah.
thing, right?
Uh-huh.
He loves cars, anything automobiles. He's like, look how fast that car's going. That is so
Uh-huh.
fun. That is the most, and he just cracks up and he does that all the time. And you're like,
Yeah.
so nice. I've captured, some of
Uh-huh.
that joy.
Yeah.
And there's others for sure. So many things are a lot harder for him
Yeah.
than for most people, but he brings so much to our
Yeah.
lives, and he over the years brings smiles to, so like randomly someone's walking down the street and he comes shares a story with them and they're walking
Uh-huh.
away all smiling.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice.
Um, you've done a ton of hard work and made a lot of progress for SETBP1. What's your hope for the future children born with the disorder?
Well, I think we still have a long ways to go. We hear a lot about how I know it's a common saying that, like it's more like a marathon than a sprint.
Hmm.
And things do take longer to make progress in the research world than you would hope.
Yeah.
But my hope is that we have SETBP1 HD and related disorder specific treatments, and it could be medication, it can be therapy, but that
Hmm.
it's customized for our kids so that as soon as and that they're identified earlier, right? That they're
Yeah.
identified earlier, and then we have treatment specific to them to help them progress and grow at their own personal optimal rate.
Yeah.
That's what we're hoping for our kids.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Haley, for joining me today and sharing your story and all your progress. And thank you so much for being my very good friend. I'm very happy to have you in my life.
Well,
So,
thanks for having me. And this was fun. And yes, I'm so lucky to have you in my life.
thanks. Bye.
Bye.